Keanu Reeves stepped into the upscale mall, his movements steady and unhurried. Dressed simply in a black t-shirt, sunglasses, and his hands tucked casually into his pockets, he scanned the space around him, taking in every detail. Despite his global fame, not a single person recognized him. Off to the side, a security guard squinted in his direction, his gaze filled with quiet disapproval. With a dismissive shake of his head, he took a step forward. "Hey, this isn't a place to loiter," he said, his tone edged with authority. "Move along, out." Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't argue, didn't even react. Instead, he simply observed. He watched as well-dressed customers were met with warm smiles while others received nothing but cold, indifferent stares. After a moment, he took a step back, turned slowly, and walked away. The security guard folded his arms, satisfied that he had done his job. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have predicted, was that by the next day, he would come to regret the decision more than anything. He would pay dearly for it. A world of wealth and unseen walls, the luxury mall sparkled under dazzling lights, its pristine marble floors reflecting the steady stream of high-end shoppers. Designer-clad customers moved effortlessly from store to store, their outfits worth more than the average person's monthly salary. The air carried a faint but unmistakable mix of expensive colognes and freshly brewed artisanal coffee served in delicate porcelain cups. Keanu walked through the mall unnoticed, a shadow moving among his face, one of the most recognizable in Hollywood, remained hidden behind dark sunglasses and the low brim of a simple black baseball cap. He wasn't there for attention. He wasn't there for admiration. He was there to watch. At first glance, everything seemed perfect, polished, flawless. But something felt off. A well-dressed woman stepped into a jewelry store and immediately 2 employees rushed to greet her with warm smiles. Champagne was offered, laughter flowed, and the atmosphere buzzed with easy charm. Moments later, a couple entered the same store. Their clothes were simple, clean, but unremarkable. They hesitated at the entrance before cautiously approaching the counter. This time, no one greeted them. Keanu observed the silent rejection unfold. The couple exchanged uncertain glances, waiting. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. Finally, a salesperson looked up, their expression blank, their voice flat. "Can I help you?" There was no warmth, no enthusiasm, no effort. The couple hesitated before shaking their heads and stepping back out onto the marble floor. Inside, the well-dressed woman continued to laugh, still sipping her complimentary champagne. A quiet unease settled in Keanu's chest. As he moved through the mall, he noticed more. The security guard positioned in a way that let him subtly track certain customers more closely than others. The way employees stiffened when passing by their higher-ups. The dismissive, almost impatient tone a waiter used while addressing a young man who clearly didn't fit the usual clientele. Keanu had seen this before, on movie sets, in luxury hotels, and high-end restaurants. But here, it hit differently. Because this mall bore his name, his brand, and yet standing there, he was nothing more than an outsider. He took a slow breath and made a decision. He would run a test. A simple black t-shirt and a silent judgment stepping toward a high-end men's boutique. Keanu reached for the glass door, only to feel a presence shift beside him. Keanu turned, meeting the same security guard's narrowed gaze. The man's eyes flicked over his black t-shirt, his sunglasses, his cap. He didn't recognize him. He only saw someone who didn't belong. "Just looking around," Keanu said smoothly, his tone even. The security guard folded his arms. "This place isn't for just anyone." Keanu raised an eyebrow behind his sunglasses. "Just anyone?" The guard cut him off before he could say more. "Look, I don't want any trouble. Just leave." For a long moment, Keanu considered his options. He could have revealed his identity right then and there. One phone call to the mall manager, and the situation would be over in seconds. But he didn't. Instead, he let the words sink in. This place isn't for just anyone. He knew he wasn't the first person to hear that phrase, and he knew he wouldn't be the last. That night, he would lie awake, replaying those words in his mind, thinking not of himself, but of everyone else who had ever been told the same thing. The next day, a reckoning, the morning sun cast golden streaks across the gleaming storefronts of the luxury mall. Another day, another crowd of shoppers flowing through the polished corridors, and among them Keanu returned, wearing the same black t-shirt, the same sunglasses, the same baseball cap. Nothing had changed, except this time he wasn't just an observer, He was a lesson waiting to be learned. It didn't take long for the same security guard to spot him. His posture stiffened, his eyes darkened with irritation. But his mind was already made up. This man didn't belong. Squaring his shoulders, he marched forward, his voice dripping with the same artificial authority as before. "You again?" Keanu remained calm. "Is there a rule that says I can't be here?" The guard smirked, shaking his head. "Come on, man. No need to cause trouble. This isn't a place for you." "Got it." Or? Keanu understood. He understood perfectly. He understood that to this man, a simple black t-shirt and a baseball cap were all it took to be seen as an outsider. He understood that this wasn't about policy. It was about perception. He understood that this time the story wasn't going to end the way the security guard expected. Without another word, Keanu turned and walked deeper into the mall. The security guard watched him go, his smirk faltering. Something told him this wasn't over. And he was right, because by the end of the day, he would learn the hard way. Some mistakes are unforgettable. The air inside the mall felt even colder now. Keanu could sense the subtle glances, curious, judgmental. Were they wondering if he was a thief, a worker who had wandered where he didn't belong? Ignoring the weight of unseen eyes, he made his way toward the cafe. He wasn't there for coffee. He was there to observe. The security guard stayed put, watching him closely. Keanu stepped inside and joined the line. A well-dressed woman ahead of him was met with a warm, familiar smile from the barista. "Good morning, ma'am." "The usual," the woman chuckled. "Oh, you know me so well." A few minutes later, it was Keanu's turn. The barista didn't smile. "What do you want?" The tone was dry, clipped. Keanu had already recognized the pattern. "A black coffee, please." The barista tapped the order into the register. A cash or card. Keanu's eyes flickered sideways. The woman before him hadn't paid yet. It wasn't just bad service. This was a system, a quiet, coded rule. Some customers paid later. Others, they had to prove they could pay first. From across the cafe, the security guard watched, arms crossed, waiting, almost expecting Keanu to do something wrong. Keanu took his coffee and left. Now he was certain this mall had invisible rules, and they were far worse than he had imagined. A system built on quiet rejections, Keanu settled onto a bench near the food court, sipping his coffee as he observed. A waiter approached a young man sitting alone, dressed plainly but neatly, ready to take his order. Just as he started jotting it down, a manager appeared, leaned in and whispered something into his ear. The waiter hesitated. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. The young man waited. A few seconds passed. Then a minute. He looked around, shifting uncomfortably. Eventually, he stood up and left. Keanu exhaled slowly, closing his eyes for a brief moment. Then that voice came again. "Seriously, man, you need to leave." Keanu opened his eyes and turned. The security guard stood there, shoulders squared, stance even stiffer than before. "I already told you," the guard said, his voice colder. "This isn't your place." Keanu clenched his fists, not in anger, not in frustration, but because deep inside a decision had already been made. Tomorrow he would return. But not as just another customer. The tables turned. The luxury mall was as pristine as ever. The same gleaming marble floors. The same air of exclusivity. The same unspoken rules. But today would be different. Keanu walked through the corridors exactly as before. Black t-shirt, sunglasses, baseball cap. But this time he wasn't alone. Strategically placed around the mall, his private security team blended into the crowd. They weren't wearing expensive suits or flashing badges, but they were there. Watching us, Keanu moved deliberately, his gaze sharp, waiting. It didn't take long. The same security guard spotted him. His brows pulled together in surprise, then irritation. With a determined stride, he marched straight toward Keanu. "You've got to be kidding me." His voice was laced with impatience. Keanu didn't move. Didn't recognize him, but something in Keanu's gave back. Instead, he slowly removed his sunglasses. The security guard hesitated. He still didn't recognize him, but something in Keanu's gaze made him take half a step back. "Are you sure you want to remove me?" Keanu asked, his voice calm, deliberate. The security guard squared his shoulders, folding his arms. "I am. You're not welcome here." Keanu smirked slightly. "This place, I own this place." The words hung in the air. Before the guard could react, a voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Reeves." One of the high-end store managers came rushing over, his face pale. He knew that name, and now, seeing Keanu without the sunglasses, he recognized the face. The color drained from his cheeks. Oh my God. Keanu said nothing. He just watched. The security guard glanced between Keanu and the manager, confusion twisting across his features. Wait, what do you mean, owner? The manager swallowed hard, his voice trembling. This is Mr. Reeves. But Keanu cut him off. I am the owner of this mall. The weight of those words crashed down like a hammer. The security guard stiffened, his face draining of color. His breathing turned shallow. Keanu took a step forward. And now tell me, who really doesn't belong here? The silence stretched. Customers noted. Some whispered among themselves. A woman discreetly lifted her phone to record. The security guard shifted uneasily, searching the crowd for support, but no one stepped in to help him. Keanu held his gaze. How many people have you treated like this? His voice was steady, unshaken. The guard didn't answer. Keanu continued, his words cutting through the still air. How many customers have you thrown out just because you decided they didn't belong? The man's gaze dropped. The manager wiped sweat from his brow, visibly rattled. Mr. Reeves, I can explain. Keanu raised a hand, silencing him. Not now. His voice was firm. But you will explain. To me, to every employee, and to every person who's ever been treated like this here, the entire mall seemed to hold its breath. But the storm was only just beginning. Tomorrow he would return, and this time everyone would know. Rotten to the core, Keanu exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about one security guard or one manager. This was the mall's culture, and that meant the real problem sat much higher. He had full access to everything, every record, every report, so he made a call. Minutes later, Carlos walked in. Carlos wasn't a corporate type. No suit, no tie, just a laptop and a knowing expression. He'd helped Keanu manage investments for years, and now he was here to dig. Carlos sat across from Keanu and flipped open his laptop. Hold the internal reports, he said, his tone grim. It's bad. Keanu leaned forward. How bad? Carlos turned the screen around. Reeves have been complaining for years. High turnover, reports of discrimination. People too afraid to speak up. He scrolled further and tapped the screen. And here's the kicker. All of it's been ignored. Management doesn't even acknowledge the complaints. They just replace staff and bury the problems. Keanu's jaw tightened. He had suspected something deeper. But this was deliberate. Carlos continued. It's not just customers. Even employees leave terrible reviews. Look at this. Keanu scanned a highlighted complaint. Working here was a nightmare. The managers only care about keeping the right kind of people happy. Question anything and you're gone. Another one. You either follow their unspoken rules or get replaced. No one fights back because everyone's scared. Carlos exhaled. That security guy from earlier, he's a symptom, not the disease. Keanu nodded slowly. So who's really responsible? Carlos tapped a name on the screen. Keanu's eyes narrowed. Mr. Lancaster, head of mall operations. The real power behind the scenes. The man behind the curtain, Mr. Lancaster, was exactly what Keanu expected. A corporate shark in an expensive suit, sitting behind a massive mahogany desk in an office that felt more like a king's throne room than a workspace. The man barely looked up when Keanu walked in. You should have scheduled a meeting, he muttered, typing away at his computer. I assume you're here about that little scene earlier? Keanu didn't sit. That scene was a symptom of a much bigger problem, he said, voice steady. Lancaster finally looked up and smiled. Not a warm smile, not even a polite one. It was the kind of smile a man gives when he thinks he's untouchable. Oh, Mr. Reeves, Lancaster said, leaning back. We're an investor, an owner, a businessman. Surely you understand that certain policies are necessary to maintain a high-end shopping experience. Keanu's eyes darkened. We mean policies that keep certain people out. Lancaster tilted his head slightly. We cater to a specific clientele. Keanu's patience was wearing thin. Oh, what happens to the employees who disagree with you? Lancaster sighed dramatically, as if this conversation bored him. Look, this is just how things work, he said. Our customers come here expecting a certain standard. And yes, that means making sure the wrong kind of people don't ruin the experience. Keanu clenched his jaw. And who decides who the wrong kind is? Lancaster smirked. I do. Keanu stared at him for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and pressed play. The recording of their conversation filled the room. Ah, yes, that means making sure the wrong kind of people don't ruin the experience, and who decides who the wrong kind is. I do. Lancaster's face went pale. Keanu let the audio finish, then pocketed his phone. You're done, he said simply. The fall of Lancaster within an hour. Lancaster's reign over the mall was over. The board had no choice but to remove him after Keanu made the recording public. News spread fast. Employees whispered. Customers cheered. The toxic culture of the mall was collapsing in real time. And in the middle of it all, Keanu stood quietly watching the walls of discrimination come crumbling down. Carlos joined him, shaking his head. That was a hell of a risk, he said. Oh, but damn, that was satisfying. Keanu took a slow breath. It's not over, he said. The culture won't change overnight, but at least now they know someone is watching. Carlos nodded, then glanced toward Lancaster. The former manager was being escorted out by security. Lancaster's eyes met Keanu's, but this time it was Keanu who didn't look away. Keanu adjusted his baseball cap. Good, he said. Because I'm not here to keep anyone comfortable. The real work begins. The mall had changed overnight. News of Lancaster's removal spread quickly. Employees whispered in the corridors. Some were shocked, others were relieved. Keanu had taken down the man at the top, but he knew that wasn't enough. A system like this didn't exist because of one person. It was allowed to exist. And now he was going to make sure that changed. He turned to Carlos. I want every employee in one room. Right now. Carlos raised an eyebrow. You're serious? Keanu nodded. This isn't just about management. I want to hear from the people who work here, the ones who live this every day. Carlos exhaled and pulled out his phone. All right, this is going to get messy. Keanu's response was immediate. Oh, good. Messy means change. A reckoning. It took an hour to gather everyone. The mall's main event space filled up. Cashiers, janitors, security guards, store managers, restaurant staff. Some looked skeptical, others hopeful. Keanu stood at the front. No podium, no microphone, just him. It won't take up too much of your time, he began. But I need to know the truth. A murmur went through the crowd. Keanu continued. I own this place, but I haven't been paying attention. That changes today. Not everyone in the room looked convinced. Some of the higher-ranking managers stood stiffly, arms crossed, clearly unhappy. Finally, one of them, sharp suit, sharp glare, stepped forward, and the real fight was about to begin. A new beginning. A man in a sharp suit stepped forward, forcing a smile. Reeves, he said, his tone carefully measured. I respect what you're trying to do, but let's not blow things out of proportion. Keanu met his gaze. You think this is exaggerated? The man hesitated. It's complicated. No, Keanu said simply. People here are being treated like they don't matter. And that stops now. Another manager, a woman, crossed her arms. You are making changes without understanding how the mall operates, she said. We have a certain image to maintain. Keanu exhaled, then took a slow step forward. You think an image is more important than people? If we change too much, she argued, we risk alienating our high-end clientele. Keanu studied her for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and opened the mall's online reviews. Do you know who else you've been alienating? He held up the screen. Everyone else. A murmur rippled through the crowd. You've been driving away good people, good customers, because you think only a certain type of person deserves to be here. Lowered the phone. That ends today. Keanu turned back to the employees. We want to make this place better, he said. But I can't do that without you. A woman from the cleaning staff raised her hand. What's going to change? Keanu nodded. Starting today, every employee will be treated with respect. If anyone, customer or manager, treats you unfairly, I want to know about it. A few people exchanged surprised looks. Keanu continued. There will be no more selective treatment of customers. If someone walks through these doors, they deserve to be here. Period. A young barista hesitated before speaking. And what if the managers don't agree? Keanu's voice was firm. Then they can work somewhere else. He turned back to the managers. I'm not here to fire people for no reason, he said. But I won't let this place keep running on fear and discrimination. He let the words settle. You have a choice. Either you help fix this or I'll replace you with people who will. Silence. Then slowly, one of the managers nodded. We'll cooperate. Keanu looked at the others. One by one, they nodded too. Some reluctantly, some genuinely, but the message was clear. Change was coming. Keanu glanced around the room. For the first time, he saw something new on the employees' faces. Hope. He picked up the microphone. "This is not just a mall," he said. "This is a symbol of what we can build together. And today we start over." A different mall, something had shifted. The whispers of fear were gone, replaced by murmurs of possibility. Keanu walked through the corridors, watching, listening. This wasn't just about policies or rules. It was about culture, and culture only changed when the people believed in it. He saw it happening, little by little. A waiter greeted a young man who looked out of place, but this time with kindness. A security guard helped a lost customer instead of eyeing them suspiciously. A manager actually smiled at an employee instead of barking orders. Things weren't perfect. They never would be, but they were better. And that was enough for now. Keanu stepped outside, took a breath of fresh air, and slipped on his sunglasses. This had started as just another night at the mall, but it had become something more, something important. And as he walked away, he knew one thing for certain: he would never be just another customer again.